A young widow, with nothing but the clothes on her back, bought a collapsed barn for $3. What she discovered underneath wasn't just about money. It was about a promise that could change everything. If you've ever felt like you've hit rock bottom, or if you're looking for a story about second chances, stick with me. And if you feel a connection to this journey, maybe consider subscribing. We're building a community here for people who understand that the deepest treasures are rarely made of gold. The air in the county auction hall was thick with the smell of damp wool coats and stale coffee. It was the kind of air that clings to you, a physical weight of other people's desperation and mild, bored greed. I sat on a folding chair in the back row, my hands tucked under my legs to keep them from shaking. I had been in the county women's shelter for 2 months, and the world had shrunk to the size of a cot, a shared bathroom, and the silent, echoing judgment in the cafeteria. Coming here was a rebellion, a tiny, foolish act of defiance against the crushing inertia of my life. My entire net worth was a crumpled $20 bill and a handful of change in the pocket of my worn jeans. Money I'd earned washing dishes for a greasy spoon diner down the street from the shelter. It felt like a fortune and nothing at all at once. My husband, Liam, had been gone for 6 months. 6 months of a silence so loud it felt like a constant ringing in my ears. He was 22, I was 20. We had a life mapped out in whispers and shared dreams, a tiny apartment filled with second-hand furniture and first-hand love. Then, a cough that wouldn't quit, a diagnosis that felt like a slammed door, and a hospital room that became our entire world. When he was gone, so was everything else. The medical bills had devoured our small savings like a wildfire, and the landlord's eviction notice was polite but firm. I landed at the shelter with a single duffel bag, and a hollowness inside me so vast I was afraid I'd echo if I spoke. The auction was for properties seized for back taxes. Most were small, forgotten slivers of land, weed-choked lots between buildings, or houses so decrepit they were liabilities. People were bidding a few hundred, sometimes a few $1,000s, their faces impassive. I was just watching, trying to feel like a part of the world again, a spectator to other people's lives. Then Lot 73 came up. "All right, folks, next we have Lot 73, the auctioneer, a man with a booming voice and a tie stained with what looked like mustard, announced. "This is a 1-acre parcel out on Old Creek Road, includes a structure. Now I'm using the term structure generously here." A few chuckles rippled through the room. "It's a barn, or it was a barn, mostly a pile of wood now. The county considers it a tear-down and removal liability. Access is via a dirt road that washes out in the spring. No utilities on site." He took a breath. "We're legally obligated to start the bidding at the outstanding tax amount, which is $1. He waited. Silence. Nobody moved. Owning this land meant being responsible for clearing it. It would cost thousands to haul away the debris. It was a money pit, a piece of forgotten, broken land that nobody wanted. $1, folks. Do I hear $1? You get a deed, you get the land. You also get the headache, but it's yours." Something stirred in me, a strange, reckless impulse. Liam and I used to talk about having a piece of land one day, a place with trees, a place where you could see the stars without the city glow washing them out. He'd sketch little cabins on napkins while we ate cheap pizza, dreaming of a life we both knew was years, maybe decades away. This was a joke, a pile of rotten wood on an acre of weeds, but it was land. $1, I said. My voice was a croak, barely audible. The auctioneer squinted in my direction. "Did I hear a bid from the back?" I cleared my throat and sat up straighter, trying to look like someone who belonged there, someone who bought property. $1, I repeated, louder this time. A few people turned to look at me, their expressions a mixture of pity and amusement. The girl in the threadbare coat buying a liability. A man in a clean flannel shirt 2 rows ahead of me sighed, as if annoyed. $2, he grumbled, not even turning around. He was probably a local who didn't want an abandoned lot sitting there and figured for a couple of bucks he could clean it up himself over a weekend. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was insane. But the image of Liam's smiling face as he drew a crooked little porch on a napkin flashed in my mind. It was a promise I'd made to him, to us, that we'd always be a little bit reckless for our dreams. $3, I said. My voice didn't shake this time. It was clear, final. The flannel-shirted man shook his head and waved a dismissive hand at the auctioneer. He was out. The auctioneer looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over the faces. No one else was even remotely interested. $3 it is, going once, going twice. He paused, giving one last theatrical look around. Sold, to the young lady in the back for $3. The gavel cracked against the wooden block, and the sound seemed to sever a cord holding me to my old life. I had just spent 15% of my worldly wealth on a pile of rotten wood. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After the auction, I waited in line at the clerk's table. When it was my turn, the woman behind the folding table gave me a tired, sympathetic look. "Lot 73?" she asked. I nodded, pulling the crumpled bills from my pocket and smoothing them out on the table. She took my $3, had me sign a few papers, and handed me a thick envelope containing the deed. My name, Ilara Vance, was now officially listed as the owner of a plot of land I had never seen. "Good luck, honey," she said, her voice softer than I expected. "Old Creek Road is about 10 miles out. Not much out there." I thanked her and walked out of the hall, clutching the envelope to my chest. The cold air hit me, a shock after the stuffy room. For the first time in months, I felt something other than grief. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something more fragile, more tentative. It was the feeling of having a direction, even if that direction led to a ruin. The next morning, I checked out of the shelter. I packed my duffel bag with the few things I owned, a change of clothes, a worn copy of a book Liam had given me, and the envelope with the deed. The supervisor at the front desk, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose kindness was often hidden under a thick layer of exhaustion, looked at my checkout form. "You have a place to go, Ilara?" she asked, her pen hovering over the paper. "I do," I said, and the words felt strange and new in my mouth. "I have property." She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. She'd seen too many women leave with high hopes, only to return a week later. She just nodded and wished me well. I walked away from the gray brick building that had been my refuge, my prison, my whole world. The bus station was a 15-minute walk. There was one bus a day that went out in the general direction of Old Creek Road. It wouldn't take me all the way, but it would get me close. The ticket cost me another $4.75. The bus was mostly empty. I sat by a window, watching the city blur into suburbs, and then into the sparse, skeletal trees of the countryside. Every mile that passed felt like a deliberate step away from the person I had become after Liam died, a ghost haunting the edges of her own life. The further the bus traveled, the more the hollowness inside me began to feel less like an empty space and more like a blank canvas. The bus driver let me off at a crossroads marked by a single blinking yellow light. "Old Creek Road is about 3 miles that way," he said, pointing down a narrow, paved road that quickly disappeared between dense stands of pine trees. "Not much traffic out here. You sure you got a ride coming?" "I'll be fine," I told him, hoisting my duffel bag onto my shoulder. "I'm walking." He gave me a long, uncertain look, but just shrugged and closed the doors. The bus pulled away with a hiss of air brakes, leaving me in a profound silence, broken only by the wind whispering through the pines. The air was different here, clean, sharp, and cold. It smelled of damp earth and pine needles. I started walking. The 3 miles felt like 10. My coat was too thin for the biting wind, and my boots, already worn, started to rub against my heels. But with every step, I felt a strange sense of purpose. I was walking towards something that was mine. It didn't matter that it was a wreck. It was a place on the map that belonged to me. The pavement gave way to gravel, and then the gravel gave way to a rutted dirt track with a small, faded sign that read, "Old Creek Road." This was it. My heart started to beat a little faster. I walked another half-mile, the trees crowding in on either side of the road. And then I saw it. Through a break in the trees, in the middle of a clearing overgrown with waist-high brown weeds, stood the barn, or what was left of it. The auctioneer hadn't been exaggerating. The roof had collapsed in the center, creating a grim, skeletal V-shape against the pale gray sky. The walls, made of weathered, silvered wood, leaned at alarming angles. Some sections had fallen away completely, leaving gaping holes. It looked less like a building and more like the fossilized remains of some great beast that had laid down and died in this field. I stood at the edge of the property, my duffel bag slipping from my shoulder and landing softly in the dead grass. A wave of despair washed over me. What had I done? This wasn't a project. It was an archaeological dig. It was a monument to failure. My $3, my foolish, impulsive act, had bought me a field of splinters. I thought about the warmth of the shelter, the guaranteed meal, the simple, predictable misery of it. I could turn around, walk back to the crossroads, and try to catch the bus back. I could admit defeat. But then I thought of Liam. He never gave up. Even at the end, when his body was failing him, his spirit was ferocious. He fought for every extra day, for every extra conversation, for every moment he could squeeze out of his life. He would be so disappointed in me if I gave up now. He wouldn't see a ruin. He'd see potential. He'd see the strong bones of the foundation still visible beneath the rubble. He'd see the tall, proud oak tree standing guard at the edge of the clearing. He'd see the way the light fell through the broken slats. Taking a deep breath, I walked onto the property. My property. The grass crunched under my feet. As I got closer, I saw the details. The rust on the huge hinges of the main doors, which were hanging askew. The faded red paint, still visible in patches, a ghost of what the barn once was. A bird flew out of a hole in the wall, startling me. The place was derelict, but it wasn't dead. It was just sleeping. I spent the rest of the afternoon just walking the perimeter, taking it all in. The acre was a perfect square, bordered by thick woods on 3 sides and the dirt road on the 4th. The ground was uneven, but mostly clear of rocks. In the back corner near the oak tree, I found the remnants of a stone wall, probably from an old animal pen. The air was still and peaceful. I was completely alone. No sirens, no shouting from other shelter residents, no hum of traffic. Just the wind and the creak of dying wood. As the sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the field, the cold started to seep into my bones. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had no tent, no food, no water. My impulsive plan had only gotten me this far. I needed to find shelter for the night. I remembered passing a small general store a mile or so back, near the paved road. Maybe they could help, or at least let me use a phone. I left my duffel bag tucked inside the most stable-looking corner of the barn, a small act of faith, and started the walk back. The store was a small, cluttered building with a single gas pump out front and a hand-painted sign that read, Miller's Mercantile. A bell jingled as I opened the door. An elderly man with a kind, wrinkled face looked up from behind the counter where he was reading a newspaper. "Can I help you?" he asked. I'm not sure," I stammered, feeling foolish again. "I just bought a piece of property out on Old Creek Road, the old collapsed barn." His eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You're the one who bought the Henderson place? We heard someone picked it up at the tax auction." He looked me up and down, taking in my thin coat and worn-out expression. "Well, I'll be. You don't look like a developer." "I'm not," I said. "My name is Ilara Vance." "George Miller," he said, extending a calloused hand over the counter. I shook it. His grip was firm and warm. "So, what's your plan for that pile of sticks, if you don't mind me asking?" "I'm going to fix it," I said, the words sounding more confident than I felt. He chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "That's a tall order, miss. That barn's been falling down since before my kids were born. But I admire the spirit." He leaned forward. "You got a place to stay tonight? It's going to drop below freezing." I shook my head, my cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I hadn't thought that far ahead. He studied my face for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Look, my wife and I have a small room over our garage. We used to rent it out, but it's been empty for years. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. You can stay there for a few nights, on the house, until you get yourself sorted. In return, maybe you can help me out around here a bit tomorrow. Stocking shelves, that sort of thing." Tears pricked my eyes. It was the first real, unconditional kindness a stranger had shown me in a very long time. I don't know what to say. "Thank you." "Don't mention it," he said, waving it off. "Folks out here look after each other. Let me just lock up, and I'll drive you back to get your things." True to his word, George drove me back to the barn in his old pickup truck. He waited in the truck while I retrieved my duffel bag, the headlights cutting two bright cones through the deepening twilight. The room over the garage was small and simple, with a single bed, a clean quilt, and a tiny bathroom. To me, it felt like a palace. That night, for the first time in 6 months, I slept without the fear of what the next day would bring. I slept soundly, dreaming of the smell of pine and the rustle of wind through the tall, dead grass of my very own land. The next few days fell into a rhythm. I'd spend the morning helping George at the store, stocking cans and sweeping floors. He'd pay me a small wage, which I used to buy sturdy work gloves, a pry bar, and food. In the afternoons, I would walk to the barn and work until dusk. My first task was simply to clear a space. The inside was a chaotic mess of fallen beams, splintered planks, and thick layers of dust and animal droppings. It was overwhelming, but I focused on one small section at a time. I dragged out rotten wood, piled up salvageable-looking planks, and swept away decades of debris. It was back-breaking work. My muscles ached in ways I didn't know they could. My hands were covered in blisters and splinters. But with every piece of rubble I removed, I felt like I was also clearing away a piece of the grief and helplessness that had been choking me. I was taking control. I was building something, even if the first step of building was demolition. George would sometimes drive by on his way home and watch me for a few minutes from his truck, a thoughtful expression on his face. One afternoon he pulled up and got out. "Making progress," he said, nodding at the growing pile of debris I'd created. "Slowly," I replied, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of a dirty glove. He handed me a thermos. "Martha sent you some hot soup. You need to keep your strength up." He looked at the barn's precarious frame. "You know, my grandfather helped raise this barn. It was a community effort back in the day. It's a shame to see it like this." We stood in silence for a moment, drinking the soup. It was warm and rich, and it felt like a gift. "I found this," I said, reaching into my pocket. I pulled out a small, rusty horseshoe I'd uncovered that morning. George took it, turning it over in his hands. "Good luck," he said with a small smile. "You're gonna need it." A week turned into 2. The small, cleared space inside the barn grew larger. I had managed to clear out one entire corner, right down to the original stone foundation and the thick, dirt-packed floor. The work was methodical, almost meditative. I wasn't just clearing a barn. I was excavating my own life, trying to find the foundation beneath the wreckage. And it was in that corner, under a floorboard that had been warped and loosened by years of damp, that I found it. I was prying up the last of the rotten planks when my crowbar hit something that wasn't dirt or stone. It made a dull, hollow thud. Curious, I knelt down and brushed away the dirt. My fingers touched cold, hard metal. I dug around it with my hands, my heart starting to beat faster. It was a box. A metal lockbox, about the size of a shoebox, dark with rust, but still solid. It was heavy, and it was locked. I carried it out into the daylight, my hands trembling slightly. I sat on a salvaged beam, turned the box over and over. Who would leave this here? And when? Was it from the original owners? A forgotten family treasure? I tried to pry the lock with my crowbar, but it was too strong. Frustrated, I stood up and brought a heavy rock down on the corner of the lid. It dented, but didn't open. I did it again, and again, the sound of metal on metal echoing in the quiet clearing. Finally, with a screech of protesting metal, the lock mechanism broke, and the lid popped open an inch. I set the rock down, my breath catching in my throat. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like old, dried leaves, was a bundle of letters tied with a simple piece of twine, and underneath them, a small, leather-bound journal. I lifted the letters out. The paper was thick and yellowed with age, but the handwriting was instantly, achingly familiar. It was Liam's. My knees felt weak. I sat back down hard on the beam, the box in my lap. How was this possible? Liam had never been here. He'd never even heard of this town. I untied the twine, my fingers fumbling. The top letter was addressed to me. Just my name, Ilara, written in his familiar, sloping script. I unfolded it. The letter began, "My dearest Ilara, if you are reading this, then it means I'm gone. And it also means you found it. You found our place." Tears streamed down my face, blurring the words. I wiped them away impatiently and kept reading. The letter, and the ones that followed, unspooled a secret history I never knew existed. Liam had been diagnosed long before he told me. Not with months to live, but with a year, maybe 2 if he was lucky. He knew his time was limited, and instead of telling me, instead of letting us both drown in the sorrow of it, he had made a plan. He'd taken the money we were saving for a down payment on a house, the money I thought had been wiped out by his initial medical bills, and he had used it to secretly buy this land. He'd found it online, a forgotten, worthless property that no one else wanted. He bought it for next to nothing at a previous tax auction, using a P.O. box in a nearby town to handle the paperwork. This was meant to be his secret gift to me, a place to call my own, a foundation to build on after he was gone. He wrote about his trips out here, how he'd drive for hours on weekends, telling me he was visiting an old friend. He'd come here and sit in the field, dreaming of the life we could have built. He wrote about the oak tree, how he imagined us having a picnic under it. He wrote about the quiet and how it was the only place where he could escape the fear of what was coming. He had placed this box under the floorboards himself on his last visit when he was already getting too weak to make the trip anymore. "I know the barn is a wreck," he wrote on the second page. "I'm so sorry I couldn't give you a palace. I wanted to. I wanted to build you a home with my own 2 hands. But I ran out of time. I know it looks like nothing, Ilara, but this land is good. The soil is rich. You can grow things here. You can build something small, something that is all yours. Please don't see this as a ruin. See it as a beginning, our beginning, even if I can't be there for it." I cried then, not quiet, sad tears, but huge, ragged sobs that tore through me. I cried for him, for the secrets he'd carried, for the incredible, heartbreaking weight of his love. He had spent his last good months not sinking into despair, but building a lifeboat for me. He had faced his own mortality, and his first thought was how to save me. The grief was immense, a physical pain in my chest, but it was woven through with a profound, staggering sense of being loved. He hadn't abandoned me to poverty and homelessness. He had given me an inheritance, not of money, but of dirt and wood and a future. The journal was filled with his plans, sketches of a small cabin, notes on solar power and rainwater collection, lists of native plants he wanted to grow. It was a blueprint for a life, our life. Tucked into the back of the journal was a folded piece of paper. It was a crude, hand-drawn map of the property. He'd marked the oak tree, the old stone wall, and a spot right in the center of the barn's foundation, marked with a simple X. Beneath it, he had written, "The real foundation, for emergencies only." I didn't know what it meant, but it could wait. For the rest of the afternoon I sat there, reading his letters over and over, letting his words wash over me, feeling his presence in the quiet field more strongly than I had since the day he died. The sun began to set, turning the sky a brilliant, painful orange. A new wave of emotion washed over me. Anger. I was angry at him for keeping such a huge secret, for not letting me share the burden of his diagnosis. I was angry at the universe for being so cruel. It felt so unfair that he had poured so much hope into this place and would never get to see it. This land was no longer just a project. It was a legacy, a sacred trust, and I felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders. The letters also contained a warning. "Be careful, Ilara," he wrote. "There's a development company, a big one, that has been buying up land all around here. They want to build a luxury resort. They approached the previous owner of this place, and they approached me through the mail. They played dirty. They tried to tell me the land was worthless and offered me pennies for it. Then they threatened to bury me in legal fees over zoning disputes if I didn't sell. I ignored them, but they won't go away. If they find out you own it, they'll come for you. They'll see a young woman, alone, and they'll think you're an easy target. Don't let them bully you. The anger solidified into something else. Resolve. I wasn't just clearing a barn for myself anymore. I was defending it. I was protecting Liam's dream from the vultures who would pave it over and turn it into a parking lot. The choice was suddenly so clear, it was terrifying. I could sell. I could take the developer's money, and they would surely offer me more than $3, and walk away. I could get a real apartment, a car, a comfortable life. It was the sensible thing to do, the easy thing. Or I could stay. I could fight. I could try to build the life Liam had sketched out on these pages, a life of independence and quiet dignity. It was the harder path. It was a path filled with uncertainty and hardship. But it was the only one that felt true. It was the only one that honored him. The next week, a car appeared down the dirt road. It wasn't George's old pickup. It was a sleek black sedan, so out of place against the rustic landscape that it looked like a spaceship had landed. It crunched to a stop at the edge of my property, and a man in an expensive suit got out. He looked at the barn, then at me, with a look of barely concealed disdain. "Are you the owner of this property?" he asked, his voice smooth and polished. "I am," I said, standing up a little straighter. I didn't offer my name. "My name is Mr. Davies. I represent the Blackstone Development Group," he said, extending a business card. I didn't take it. "We've been acquiring parcels in this area for a new resort project. This is one of the last holdouts. Frankly, it's an eyesore and a liability, and we're prepared to do you a favor and take it off your hands." "It's not for sale," I said, my voice steady. He smiled, a thin, predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I think you might want to hear our offer before you say that. We know this property was purchased at a tax auction for a negligible amount. We are prepared to offer you $50,000. Cash. You sign the papers, and you can walk away from this mess with enough money to start a new life." $50,000. The number hung in the air between us. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was a ticket out of poverty. It was an apartment, a car, food security for years. It was everything I had been desperately wishing for just a few weeks ago. I thought of the cold nights at the shelter, the gnawing hunger, the constant grinding fear. I could end all of that right now. All I had to do was say yes. But then I thought of Liam's letters. I thought of his secret trips, his carefully drawn plans, his desperate hope. He hadn't bought this land so I could sell it to the very people he warned me about. He had bought it so I could build on it. This wasn't just land. It was the last piece of him I had left. "I said," I repeated, my voice low and firm, "it's not for sale." Mr. Davies' smile vanished. His face hardened. "Miss whoever you are, let me be clear. You cannot afford this place. The property taxes will be reassessed now that it's been sold. You'll have county ordinances about clearing this hazardous structure, which will cost you thousands. We have a team of lawyers who are very good at finding code violations and easement disputes. We can keep you tied up in court for years. Or you can take the $50,000 and walk away clean. I suggest you think about it very carefully." He placed the business card on a nearby fence post. "You have 24 hours to call me." He got back in his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. I stood there, my heart pounding, the weight of his threats settling on me. He was right. I couldn't afford lawyers. I couldn't afford to pay for a demolition crew. I couldn't even afford the new property taxes. The $50,000 had seemed like a lifeline, but his threats made it feel like a ransom. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my little room over the garage, Liam's journal open in my lap. I was terrified. Maybe selling was the smart move. Maybe fighting was just a romantic, foolish notion that would leave me with nothing but legal bills and another eviction. Was I strong enough to do this? I thought about what I would say to you right now. If you're watching this and you've ever been faced with a choice that felt impossible, where the easy way out was tempting but felt like a betrayal of who you are, I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same path. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to make a choice like that. Your stories matter. They help all of us feel a little less alone in the fight. The next morning, I made a decision. I took the bus back into the county town, but I didn't go to the bus station. I went to the courthouse. I found the public records office and asked for the name of a local attorney who handled property law. The clerk gave me a few names. One of them, a Mr. Abernathy, had an office just a few blocks away. It was a small, dusty office above a bakery. Mr. Abernathy was a quiet, older man with kind eyes behind thick glasses. He listened patiently as I told him the whole story. I told him about Liam, the shelter, the auction, the letters, and Mr. Davies' visit. I expected him to tell me I was being foolish, to advise me to take the money. Instead, he just nodded slowly when I was finished. "Blackstone Development," he said, his voice quiet but laced with steel. "They've been bullying folks around here for years. They buy up land, let it fall into disrepair, then use it as leverage to get zoning changes. They're not popular." He looked at me over his glasses. "You have your late husband's letters with you." I pushed the bundle across the desk. He spent the next hour reading them carefully, his expression unreadable. He read the journal too, paying close attention to Liam's notes about the developer's threats. Finally, he looked up. "Your husband was a very smart man, Mrs. Vance, and a very brave one." He tapped a page in the journal. He documented their harassment, dates, names, the specific threats they made. "This is very useful." He leaned back in his chair. He also did something else. According to this, he set up a small trust with the last of his money. It's not much, but he directed it to be used to pay the property taxes on Lot 73 for 5 years after his death. The trust is managed by a bank in the next state. Blackstone couldn't have known that. They assumed the taxes were delinquent because the county records are slow to update with trust payments. I stared at him, speechless. Liam had thought of that too. He had protected the land even from the taxman. "This changes things," Mr. Abernathy said. "It shows foresight and intent. It makes your claim to the land much stronger than that of a simple auction buyer. It establishes a legacy." He paused. "I'll take your case, Mrs. Vance. I'll write a letter to Mr. Davies informing him that you have legal representation and that any further contact should be through my office. I will also inform him that we have documentation of his company's prior harassment, and that any attempt to interfere with your property rights will be met with a swift and aggressive lawsuit." "But I can't afford to pay you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He gave me a small, rare smile. "We can work that out later. Let's just say I have a personal interest in seeing Blackstone Development get a taste of their own medicine. For now, we work on contingency. Now, about this map." He pointed to the drawing in the journal. "This real foundation he mentions. Have you looked for it?" I shook my head. I didn't know what to make of it. I thought it was just symbolic. "Maybe," he said, "but a man who was meticulous enough to set up a 5-year tax trust might not have been speaking in metaphors." I suggest you go home and do some digging." I left his office feeling like a different person. The fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective fire. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I had an ally. I had a defense. And I had a treasure map. When I got back to the barn, the sun was high in the sky. I walked to the center of the cleared space, to the spot marked with an X on Liam's map. The ground was hard-packed earth. I took a shovel that George had lent me and started to dig. The work was slow and difficult. The ground was rocky just below the surface. For hours I dug. My back screamed in protest, and my hands were raw. But I kept going, driven by a desperate curiosity. What had he left here? What was the real foundation? About 3 feet down, the shovel hit something with a dull thud. It wasn't a rock. It was flat and hollow sounding. My heart leaped into my throat. I dropped to my knees and clawed at the dirt with my hands. I uncovered the edge of a large, black, waterproof container. It was one of those heavy-duty footlockers used for camping or military surplus. It took me another half an hour to dig it out completely. It was heavy, and it was sealed tight. With my pry bar, I worked at the latches. They were stiff with dirt and pressure. Finally, with a loud pop, the seal broke. I lifted the lid. I don't know what I was expecting. Gold bars? Family jewels? It was nothing so dramatic, but it was so much more valuable. On top was a thick, sealed envelope. Inside was cash. Stacks of $100 bills, neatly bundled. I didn't count it then, but I would later. It was just over $30,000. The rest of the money Liam had saved, the money he hadn't put in the trust. It was startup money, seed money, enough to live on for a year, enough to buy materials, enough to begin. Underneath the cash were 2 more items. The first was a set of professionally drafted blueprints, rolled up and tied with a ribbon. They were for a small, simple, beautiful cabin. The very one Liam had sketched in his journal, now rendered in perfect, precise detail by a real architect. It was designed to be built on the existing barn foundation, using salvaged wood from the demolition where possible. It was small, sustainable, and perfect. The final item was a simple manila folder. I opened it. Inside was the original clear deed to the property, in Liam's name, and a legally executed document that transferred the ownership to me upon his death, completely bypassing any probate or public record that the developers could have easily tracked. He hadn't just bought me a wreck at a tax auction. He had legally and quietly secured this land for me from the very beginning. The tax sale was just the final confusing piece of a brilliant protective puzzle he had designed to keep the property hidden until I was ready. I sat there, in the dirt, surrounded by the wreckage of the old barn and the pieces of my new life. I held the blueprints in one hand and the deed in the other, and I finally understood. The treasure wasn't the money. The treasure was the plan, the security, the foresight, the love. Liam hadn't just left me a piece of land. He had left me a fully realized, legally protected, and funded dream in a box. He had given me not just a foundation of stone, but a foundation of hope. The fight with Blackstone Development wasn't over in a day. Mr. Abernathy sent the letter, and the phone calls stopped. But their presence lingered. For weeks, the same black sedan would be parked at the end of the road, just watching. It was an intimidation tactic, meant to unnerve me. But every time I saw it, I would just grip my shovel a little tighter and get back to work. I wasn't scared of them anymore. They were just bullies, and Liam had already given me the shield I needed to protect myself. With the money from the box, I was able to hire a small local crew to help me with the demolition. We worked carefully, salvaging every good piece of timber, every usable beam. The town, which had at first been skeptical, started to rally around me. George Miller told my story to everyone who came into his store. People would drop by with food or offer to help for a few hours. The same man in the flannel shirt who had bid against me at the auction showed up one Saturday with his 2 teenage sons. "Heard you were building something," he said gruffly. "Figured you could use a few strong backs." We tore down the old barn, but we didn't destroy it. We deconstructed it. We saved its bones. And on the old stone foundation, we began to build something new. Using Liam's blueprints, we started framing the little cabin. I learned how to use a circular saw, how to swing a hammer, how to read a level. My hands grew calloused and strong. My body, once weak with grief, became powerful. The day the last wall of the frame went up, the whole crew, a small collection of my new neighbors and friends, stood back and looked at the skeleton of my new home. It stood proud against the sky, on the same spot where the broken-down barn had once slumped. It was a testament not to what was lost, but to what could be built from the ruins. As I stand here now, on the small porch of my finished cabin, I can still smell the sawdust and the fresh paint. The $30,000 is mostly gone, invested in lumber, windows, and a small solar array on the roof. I'm not rich, not in the way Mr. Davies would understand. I don't have a fancy car or a big bank account. But I wake up every morning in a house I helped build, on land that is mine, surrounded by a community that has my back. I have a garden planted with the seeds I bought from Miller's Mercantile, and the oak tree Liam loved provides shade in the afternoon. To be rich is to have a place to call home. It's to have work that fills you with purpose. It's to be surrounded by love, both the love of those who are with you and the enduring love of those who are gone. Liam gave me all of that. He buried a treasure for me under that old barn, a treasure of security, of purpose, and of a future he would never see, but one he believed in for me with all his heart. This home is not an ending. It's the beginning he always wanted for us. And so I want to leave you with this. If you are in a dark place, if you feel like you are surrounded by wreckage, please know that foundations are often hidden underneath. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to start digging. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please subscribe and become part of this community. Share your own stories of rebuilding in the comments below, because every story of survival and hope is a blueprint for someone else who might be feeling lost in the dark. You are not alone.